This young sapling right here is an endangered species. So this is the longleaf pine, a culturally and historically important species of pine tree that can be found in the piney woods region of the southeastern United States. Now, this tree used to be extremely widespread. However, due to excessive logging and a very long history of fire suppression, this species is now endangered. But the location that I'm at right now is absolutely filled with an amazing array of adult longleaf pine trees. Let's talk about them a little bit. Now, before I get into this information, I'm going to be very, very clear that I'm getting a lot of it from this sign and from Google searches. I'm not an expert by any means, but I have always loved this species. So, like I mentioned, it is an extremely fire-resistant species, and that can be seen right here on this beautiful, mature longleaf pine. Yeah, gotta look up. Now, when we look at these burn marks on it, it's incredible, right? We think of, well, we burn trees, we burn logs, so why are some of these pines fire resistant? Well, fire resistance has had a long history with pine trees in particular. Now, the longleaf pine in this particular region is the most fire resistant species, which is very advantageous. Its historical ecosystem would be these grassy savannas where it would be absolutely filled with these beautiful trees. Look at these guys. So this is a beautiful example of longleaf pine savanna. So you can see here, right? So this is exactly what we were talking about earlier. So we have these younger trees, these younger saplings of longleaf pine, and you can tell they're a good size, right? But out here, you start to see the grasses coming in. So this is exactly what this area would look like following a fire, maybe just a couple of years after a fire, right? And it's very likely that there was a fire here, prescribed fire most likely. But you can start to see some of these trees coming up, right? So these are, of course, in the young grassy stage, but then you have some over here that are in the rocket stage where they are growing up rapidly. And these trees can grow extremely rapidly. I'll put exactly how fast inside of the description so that I'm not saying the wrong thing, but these ones right here in particular. So this is exactly what I'm talking about with this rocket stage. So currently this tree is maybe 12, 14 feet high. You know, it's absolutely dwarfing me. I'm right at, well, in these boots, maybe at 6 foot. But this is exactly what I wanted to show you. So now imagine this same ecosystem here, but dominated by these trees being absolutely tall. Now they'll still be very spread out. Don't get me wrong. So what you'll see is the trees basically up in between the grasses. You could start to see some of that out there. We have some adult trees like this one here, that one there, that have risen up out of the grassy lands, but this is not a matured ecosystem yet. That is what this preserve is working to do. We are in a particular area where there has been heavy restoration management practices. So there's been a large degree of replanting in this area. So there has been an enormous push to try and restore this incredibly important tree. And a lot of that has to do with replanting, but also starting fires. Now, these aren't uncontrolled, wildfires that are just going to spread through the forest and burn everything down. These are controlled burns. And these controlled burns are incredibly important to properly maintain the forests. Yep. So the young trees are definitely not as fire resistant. That is, of course, they're a lot smaller. Often the fires will be much bigger than that little sapling right here that we took a video with right at the start of this, but the mature trees are very fire resistant. That's why you'll see many of them have burn marks at the bases of these trees. So when a fire comes through the area, it clears the ground of understory brush, it clears the air of young trees, it clears the area of other plant species. So what remains is basically the adult trees, as well as the bare ground. Now, grasses will of course be the first thing to sprout up, because that's one of the first stages of ecological succession. Now, the young trees, the young longleaf pines, they actually stay in this sort of young stage from anywhere between 1 and 7 years. But then what happens is this incredible stage called the rocket stage. And it's called a rocket because the tree starts to grow incredibly quickly. All of a sudden, it grows extremely rapidly. It grows to the point where it's actually above what is called the fire zone, or the area that the fire is actually going to affect this species. And then it keeps maturing, and it turns into any one of these beautiful pine trees that we see around us, to become its beautiful, mature stage. Now, a big reason that this tree, like I mentioned, is imperiled, it is endangered, is because of logging. Now, it's not necessarily that this tree was, well, it was overlogged. It was overlogged, but then the problem was it wasn't replaced with longleaf pine. It was actually replaced with shortleaf pine. So the shortleaf pine is just better for the lumber industry. It is more beneficial for them to use it, and by beneficial I mean profitable, to use the shortleaf pine. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We do need lumber, but more recently there have been pushes to bring back the dominant tree in this area, and specifically in national preserves like the one I'm in right now. This is Big Thicket. So a lot of this, and what I think is absolutely beautiful about the preservation and conservation of this tree, is that a lot of it has been done through community science. What is community science? Well, it's science where the community is directly involved. It is one of my absolute favorite versions of science, because you're not getting people and saying, hey, you should read my paper, it's up behind a paywall, I think you'll like it. You're actually taking people out into the field and having them do the science with you. So what does that look like for here? Well, it's been massive replanting efforts. It's had students, and I mean students, kids, children, young people, getting out into these beautiful woods and helping to conserve the area. And that form of science is so critical. Without that connection, how many of those students would, one, care about this? To them it's a tree. Who cares about a tree? It's just a tree. But now that they're seeing and they're understanding and they're actually playing a part in the conservation of this species. So what is the future of the longleaf pine? Well, that's a question for experts. Again, I'm not a botanist. I study lizards and frogs and salamanders. But I, of course, love to know about the ecology, and I love to know about the natural history of an area, because it is critically important for me to understand that so that I can find the species I want to find. But the future of the longleaf pine is really in the hands of the people. The National Park System manages this preserve, and it is of course funded by us, and it's up to our federal government we pay our taxes, hopefully, and that money goes towards conserving these incredible trees, as well as many other things. We're not just conserving a single tree by replanting these. Longleaf pine forests are instrumental for many other species. It is actually one of the most species-rich ecosystems in North America. So it has been said that within a single square meter, as many as 40 different plant species can be found. So when we're conserving a tree, what are we actually doing? We're not just conserving a single tree. We are conserving an entire ecosystem made up of the birds that you love, made up of the snakes that you maybe don't love as much. It's made up of unique flora and fauna that can only be found in these beautiful longleaf pine savannas. And the more we protect the longleaf pine, the better we protect this amazing ecosystem. So how can you help? How can you help preserve this incredible ecosystem? How can you be someone who is going to help preserve this beautiful and endangered species and ecosystem? Well, I'll leave some resources down below. I will make sure to attribute anyone that I can find that is working to actually help out this system. But the best thing that you can do, you as an individual, is to get out there and help volunteer locally. Now, I know that's very tricky in the era of COVID, but there are many ways. There is online advocacy, which is exactly what this is. There is going out to your parks and, maybe bringing someone who didn't know about these parks before, someone that you are maintaining social distance with. But there's also, of course, speaking with your dollar if you're able to do so. And I'm sure many of these national parks and national preserves and other initiatives that are working to preserve this beautiful tree would love that. But I will always say, get out there and try to help with the science yourself. Community science works, it is beneficial, and honestly, it's a lot of fun. So, I'm signing out. Remember, always go out there and try to learn adventurously.